So first of all, I want to acknowledge that this is not just my work, and the slides were prepared by Ariel, and he presented them already before, so I couldn't escape not mentioning his name, right? And he's coming from University of Washington, and I'm coming from the neighborhood of McGill, which is at Dartmouth College, which is just a little bit south, where I lead Center for Open Neuroscience. So if there is free funds available for, providing endowment, I'm here to talk. Okay, and did you mention the striking difference between opening kind of session and session which we are in now? There was over 1,000 times more mentioning of word standard in this session, because it wasn't mentioned at all in the previous session. Although open standards is actually what glues all those facets of open science. Open standards are the language which let us bring together all those open science facets and innovations. That's why I'm really proud, but also really happy to accept this award and say thank you for recognizing the value of open standards in the open science. But as some people haven't heard about what brain imaging data structure is, first, of course, it's a standard, right? So you've heard standard already more than 1,000 times more to describe and organize neuroscience data sets. But it's also a set of tools which can work with data in this standard form. The ending of previous session was using the right words. There was unification, right? There was harmonization, but standard word wasn't used. But that is actually what makes those tools really efficient in working with data. It's not sufficient to share the data, it's necessary to standardize it and harmonize it to make it more useful. But also there is a community aspect. I am here to represent the entire BIDS project, and BIDS project is not just the standard, it's not just the tools, but it's really communal effort, and this effort itself is something to learn from and also to join. So altogether, BIDS, tools, standards, and the community. But okay, what is the problem you're trying to solve? I kept saying that we need common language, right? But maybe to bring kind of closer to home, I will introduce you to the problem of transport logistics. It used to be that everybody had to carry just, put their stuff to deliver to vendors who sell your produce on different carriages. And it wasn't easy, right? Because they all would come in different forms and shapes and different, maybe, conditions necessary to deliver it, so it was a nightmare. And that's why people came up with containers, right? Containers, standard size. You stack thousands of them on the ship and you deliver them, and then you unload, right? So containers provided you this standard form to deliver goods. And how standards are different for data. It's exactly the same aspect. So for containers, then people came up with documents which describe it, right? And I'm not sure how open this standard would be. Would I call it open? In a sense, all standards are open because you can read it, right? Because otherwise it's not a standard, right? If you cannot just read it. But there is more to openness. I mentioned community. I mentioned tools. Can you contribute to a standard to make it cater to your needs? And this catering and change is actually also embraced by standards. Even those standards, they have amendments. So standard is not something fixed in time, and that's it. You cannot change it, and if it doesn't cater you, you come up with another standard. You probably saw all those XKCD comics, right? Oh, there is no standard which fits my need, let me create a standard, right? Now we have like 101 and 102. So the point is that they all could be amended, and they all could be changed to cater your needs. So in previous session, we talked about non-neuroimaging, and if there is problem that there is no standard, let's talk. Let's improve standards, and that's how we work in BIDS to improve it to cater wider audience. But okay, why do we need standards in science in general? Well, let's say imagine that researcher A collected some imaging data, published it in some fancy journal. Researcher B requests the data after reading the paper. And what is typical interaction before standard form? And maybe there is open data sharing initiative already in place, right? Researcher A sends researcher B their data, or researcher B downloads it from somewhere, and data organized in some particular way. And then what happens? You know, researcher B doesn't know how to read or understand the data. It's quite possible researcher A no longer knows how to read the data, which is quite typical too, right? Because postdoc already moved on, right? So really, there is a problem. And then researcher B just gives up and does not follow on original finding, right? And the problem kind of manifests similar way in tools, right? So let's say researcher C developed some new method and published it in other really recognized journal. And then researcher D would like to use that method on their own data. And what following could happen? Well, researcher D downloads C code and tries to run it, but then code expects data organized some other way, right? So you know what would happen, right? Code requires knowledge of certain acquisition parameters, no longer available, and pretty much people give up again, right? So there was open stuff, but people couldn't know how to communicate it. They didn't know how to share that knowledge. That's why standards are super important. Okay, and standards, maybe you've heard about FAIR. Who have not heard about FAIR? See, everybody heard about FAIR. So FAIR is an acronym to describe data sharing resources in terms of findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reusability. And now FAIR is applicable to everything. Like, I don't know, there might be FAIR chair standard now, I don't know. But the point is that FAIR, if you look at those principles, they all rely on standard language of interaction, on standards, how to find stuff, how to access stuff, how to interoperate all those interfaces, and how to reuse, right? Everything relies on the language. That's why standards as a language of communications are so important. Okay, so how BIDS kind of implements FAIR principles for you, you already saw it, right? In that thousands more of mentions of the word standard. If we have files organized in DICOMs, which is also great standard and really popular in clinical research, right? This is what our scanners spit out. And it's really standardized form underneath, but it's not human accessible, right? Can you understand from these, you know, what's this experiment about, how many subjects or whatnot? No, right? So it's not necessarily human accessible. And what BIDS' purpose is to make it both human readable and also machine readable. So by looking at this file tree hierarchy, you as a pure human being, poor human being, as myself, right, can immediately understand, right? And what I kind of keep saying that the kind of boring part about BIDS is that once you saw one BIDS data set, you see them all, because they all look alike. You go to a new data set, oh, it looks the same. There is subject subfolders, there is data set description, there is participants TC, right? So it becomes not even kind of a problem to understand new data set. That's why maybe we don't mention word standard anymore, but it's super important. And as such, FAIR principles, all the archives which need to implement FAIR in your imaging, they pretty much have to use common language, and common language now is BIDS in your imaging, and some other fields as I will show. Okay, so the future of neuroscience is open, right? So there is many portals which already share data, and those benefit immediately from features which standard provides you. Let's say validation. You can validate the data set that it's legitimately formatted and everything is up to par. But also, BIDS enables you to share large amounts of data. As you have heard from Frank, there is thousands of data sets shared, right? Thousands of subjects, participants. And also, there is even more not shared. On the right, you see the graph from MRI-QC where it's just reporting that, oh, there was MRI-QC done on those participants. So there's hundreds of thousands of subjects data analyzed, but not necessarily shared, but come from BIDS data sets. So there is hundreds of thousands of data sets shared. And there is such studies as, let's say, ABCD study, in which, again, lots of subjects which originally weren't formatted as BIDS. So this data set started to appear before BIDS, or during the times when BIDS started to emerge. So they couldn't immediately jump onto the wagon, but they took the effort to harmonize it and provide BIDS compliant data set for the study. So there is no excuse to not go back to your study and improve it. And as I wanted to mention, it's not only for MRI. There is BIDS enhancement proposal, a BIDS extension proposal, it's actually a mechanism which allows you to extend it for other modalities. So it was extended for MEG, but also for microscopy BIDS. And that is an example of such datasets which we provide from DAID archive, where it is over 300 terabytes of microscopy data organized as BIDS dataset. There we go. So there is no excuse in other fields not to adopt BIDS, and we work actively within BIDS to improve it now for animal electrophysiology data. Also, there are collections, you've heard already about fMRI prep, it's standard BIDS application. But also, again, BIDS is not about only tools and standards, but about people. So there is BIDS steering committee, advisory group, community, and let me mention BIDS steering group, which by attrition took this prize. We applied for third year in a row, right? And steering group is elected democratically every year, and we provide general direction to the project, and here is current members. Yamar, Robert, actually Robert is stepping down, Ariel, Yaroslav, me, Ariel, and Dora, and Camille, who join us to the steering group. But there is also maintainers group. This is volunteers who decided to contribute their time and just participate in the project. Again, nobody is rejected. It's open standard to the extent of it. And of course, there is also BIDS contributors who can make this community happen. And there is over 300 of them, and they're all acknowledged. So acknowledgement is part of open science practice, and we are trying to stick to it. Okay, so community, who is using it? People from all over the world. So there is over 10,000 unique visitors monthly, I believe, to this specification website. So with that, I want to thank you again for awarding this prize. I think the BIDS community really deserved it, and I'm happy to accept it on their behalf.
All right. Thank you, Yaroslav, for the great talk. So don't go anywhere. We're going to be on to the next part of our session. So you stay up. Halchenko can come up. We're actually going to have a kind of a small panel discussion with Justine and me, where we're going to get to grill you in a way about your prize and why did you win it, et cetera, et cetera. And then we're going to open it up to the audience for questions then at the end. So first off, no, I'll take the dangerous seat. You can take the nice seat. If there's a chance that someone falls over, it's best it's me. Justine can go on the other side.
Surrounded. We cannot escape.
All right. It's comfortable. Okay, if I look like I'm going to fall off the stage, please warn me. It'll probably be too late at that stage. So, Justine, do you want to kick off with some questions or any comments?
Yes. Well, I have a comment, which is that my pants clash terribly with this chair, and it's bothering me, so it has to bother all of you. But actual science now. So first of all, very big congratulations. Maruf is on Zoom. Nice. Maruf, you want a thumbs up just to make sure you can hear us? I want to make sure this is all...
Can you hear us okay, Maruf? We'll keep it like that.
We'll let A view this up, but hopefully Maruf gets connected quickly. So I did just want to ask, for some people, they start doing open science because they kind of know about it, they think it's awesome, they're like, yes, open science, let's do it. And for other people, they just kind of do it because they accidentally fell into like a trap almost, like the people around you are doing it, and suddenly you find yourself doing it. So could you just tell us a little bit about how you, just tell us the story of how you got to where you are, why are you doing this open science stuff, how did you get involved, and maybe you could throw in a little, how would others get involved too?
Okay, I guess I will start. So when I started doing science, I never really thought about doing open science. I just want to do good science that is ethical. And from I was a kid, I was already very involved in open source culture, and I'm the crazy kid that installed Linux on my dad's computer. I was 14. So I just really liked this kind of DIY culture, and also just like you can get to meet a lot of people like at BrainHack, and also working with the BIDS community is just super fun. So there's no lack of opportunities out there. You can definitely find like BIDS, and you can find BrainHack, and you can join them and see if there are people interested in what you're doing.
I am already, unfortunately, too old to kind of tell you the full story. But I came from the evil side. I was using Windows. I was using Delphi programming language, and I was kind of isolated, right? Because we didn't have good connection in Ukraine to internet, and I had to come up with my own solution. So I wasn't part of any scientific open endeavor. But then I came to the States, and I came to the lab of Barak Perlmutter, who was open source developer. He was Debian maintainer. He was developing that software which gives you the terminal, right? So you start the computer and it gives you black box. It was magic, right? After all the Windows stuff. I had no clue what to do with it, right? But that's how I was introduced to open software. And that really sympathized with me because I liked the program before, right? But it wasn't part of anything bigger. So later on became also Debian developer. So I contributed to a larger open software project, right? Which made it to the moon, I believe, like some parts of it. Or now getting to the Mars, right? So it's this pride also kind of open, being part of something great here. And your name sticks with it. Unlike if you go to some industry, right? It doesn't stick there, right? So you're just somebody who does something and nobody knows that you've contributed. In open science, you're, like, I mentioned those names, unfortunately I couldn't name them all, but it's there. And then we started to work, I found similar-minded people, Michael Hanke, who also was interested in Debian and also was interested in MRI, and apparently was also working with a neighbor of my advisor, who also was interested in machine learning. So we started to develop PyMBPA together. And as a prerequisite, it needs to be open source, so we could share it widely, and should be well tested, so we are not ashamed to share it widely, right? And we would accept contributions, and then people started to come to us. But that was kind of the beginning of how I got involved with open science. And then it went all downhill with all the standards and stuff. Too much to tell.
Maruf, can you hear us? Do you have any comments on that? Yes, we can hear you. Great. So maybe, since we have you there, Maruf, we'll ask the next question for you and then over to the other two panelists. So often we kind of have these symposiums and, we always talk about our successes, how everything works, everything's great, we're really happy to be open scientists. But I'd like to kind of hear from you, Maruf, first, and maybe then Yaroslav and Halchenko. What do you think the biggest challenges are to do open science? And I guess, do you have an example or examples of obstacles that kind of came up in your way to actually, go from, in a way, you had a problem to then solving it through open science? So maybe we'll start with you, Maruf. You're muted. You're muted, I'm afraid. If you just unmute. Yes, now we can hear you. Not a problem. So I guess the question would be, what was your biggest challenge in a way to do this open science project? Yes. Yes, that's the correct. Thank you, Marv. Maybe just a little thing that Marv said for you, Yaroslav. International standards, is it difficult to get them up and running?
Define what international standard is.
That is what, I guess we were going to put that question to you.
There are aspects of international, let's say, collaboration, sharing, right? So those are sometimes really localized, right? So Europe introduced GDPR, right? So there is, I don't want to call them restrictions, but different procedures, right? How you would need to share data, right? So these international aspects then of data exchange and collaboration become a little bit heavier and more complicated. But the right initiatives, I know, let's say, Franco Pistilli is involved with one to kind of standardize more of this information exchange, right, and standardization. So it is, easier to share data and also provision. Let's say we started Open Brain Consent Form to standardize how we form consent forms in the States, but also there is Cyril and his group contributed GDPR version of it, right? So we have now internationalization of that project to foster data sharing. I hope that answers.
No, that's a good. I think so. What about you, Halchenko? What's the biggest challenge to be doing this in open science?
Right, so actually I want to tag along with the conversation about this standards that we've been mentioning throughout this whole session. So it is always very fun to start something new, but if you have something like a standard, you need to maintain it. And as someone who is working also behind the scene as a developer of Nylon, I've seen that looking for a grant to maintain a project, like an open source project, is quite difficult because the researchers are not coming from the same institute. They are distributed. And how are you going to let a traditional funding body in order to recognize all these things? And this goes back to my personal challenge as a junior researcher. So right now I'm on the job market. I'm looking for a faculty position. And a lot of my contribution, a lot of my records are on GitHub. It is a place where we share code and it has log activity of your contribution, just everything is there. But that kind of things is not in the traditional CV. So how do you communicate with the people that has possible power to give you money, give you a job, to understand that maintaining these things are important and you might need to look for the record elsewhere in order to get that happen?
Could I just compliment here on how smart and tricky Halchenko is? You saw in her talk that instead of maintaining her own toolbox, she just offloaded that burden onto Nylon people. And that's legitimate. That's how you should do it. Instead of creating your own one-off, thing which you have to maintain or somebody has to maintain, you're better off by joining a bigger project which has maintainers, right? And which has established already that ecosystem to maintain it. And then you just reaping the benefits, right? So be smart. And could I compliment also on what is kind of, from my point of view, what is one of the obstacles in open science, is that it's usually approached as afterthought. So in general, science is open, right? So in general...
Yeah, science is open. We're going to open the question and answers in a minute. Justine probably has another question, I said, so... No.
I wanted to finish that line of thought, but I know I forgot. Anyway, right. So don't take it as afterthought. Not even necessarily you want to share everything right away when you do it, but be prepared too. So standardize your data ahead of time, and then you're reaping the benefits that you don't need to do it later when it's more difficult. Prepare your code with some license, so later on, when you shift to another institution, you could still use it because it's open source, and because they wouldn't be able to forbid you to use it. So all those aspects that are kind of embedded in there. Think about it ahead of time.
So kind of trailing along with this, I'm a trainee and I've been really fortunate that I work or I do research in a lab that's very open science forward. So I personally kind of fell into the whole open science thing by accident because the people around me were doing it. But how would you, or do you have any words of wisdom for how to incentivize at the trainee level to begin doing these sorts of open science projects, but also how to foster kind of an environment that is really ground up? So not just how to support open science at the level of large grants or for PIs or these big projects, but also just like a new master's student in the lab who needs to find its way doing research?
I would say don't make it anything special. This is just should be new normal. Oh, instead of just dumping data in some who knows what format, it has to be in bits. So establish these operational procedures in your lab where people, they have to participate in brain hack. There is no other way. I don't have time to teach you, right? Go there, talk to others, right? Participate, contribute to that project because I know that they have that tool and they could take your code. Yes, work with them. So just make those procedures built in, cooked in, so it's nothing special. That would be my kind of how-to.
Yep. So, So, like, one thing is, like, for trainees, you often feel like you are just new in this, you don't know where to find your people, and definitely finding community is a really good place. And another thing is, if you want to learn about all these new skills you want to acquire to partake in these movements, there are a lot of resources online now. Like, for example, the organization Brain Hack, it is 11 years old now. Yeah, there's 11 years old. And from there, we also have a spin-off called Brain Hack School that hosts a lot of awesome material that people can learn about all these information. How do you, like, start your own, like, code repository, what license you need to select for your code, and all these kind of things. So resources are more available than ever. So if you can find the resources, there's going to be a community behind it to maintain it. Reach out to the community and be part of it. And also just remember there's no contribution too small. Because I remember my only BIDS contribution is so trivial. It's when they update the website, the template was not working. And then I was like, the search bar on the template is not working. And then they was like, oh yeah, it is actually not working. We need to roll it back to, and also tell the upstream maintainer. And that was like my very small contribution because I cannot click on things. So yeah, there's going to be opportunities everywhere because this is something maintained by a lot of volunteers, and we will make mistakes, and you can help out in that way. Yeah.
Murph, do you have anything?
All right, so we're going to open questions up to the audience. Anything? It's hard to see with the light, but if you put up your hand, then the microphone will go down to you as before. Let's see. Any questions? JB, to start, and then we'll work our way across.
Thanks. I'm so glad that BIDS got the prize to do this year. I just want to so well preserved. one thing that about standards is actually very difficult is, as you said, like to sustain and to also validate those things. There will be like many standards proposed. I just want to ask you about the role that some organization like INCF, for instance, could play or better play in that process, validating those standards. Which ones are the ones that are well maintained? Which ones are the ones that are truly open in many ways? Which ones are the ones that and how do we maintain that activity, generally speaking? Is the sustainability aspect of that is always a bit the question, the main question to me.
Well, first of all, INCF was really at the cradle of BIDS inception, right? So it established us platform, it gave us a platform where we could talk together, which brought together those people who are interested to make something like BIDS happen, right? So that was initially really important to have some organization which values its standards, and that was like a decade ago, right? And now to maintain it, I would say it's primarily where we don't aim for one big grant to maintain BIDS. But because BIDS is so used in many fields now, right, you come up with portions of what yet to be developed in BIDS and make it a part of some other bigger project, right? Let's say you work on connectivity BIDS, and it becomes part of BIDS, and it helps to sustain and maintain that portion of BIDS. So don't aim for something huge, but aim for something smaller, and that's where INCF also comes back in to maintain some specific aspects, let's say help to establish working groups which work on specific aspects, and maybe before the funding comes from bigger grant funding agency, also support those initial grassroots kind of efforts to maintain it. I hope that helps too.
Thanks a lot for the wonderful presentations and discussion. So two of you mentioned that Linux, Debian more specifically, inspired you early in your career. And in the development of open source software, at some point industry started using it and contributing to it, and that led to an explosion of quality and sustainability. Have you seen that happen in this type of initiative you were involved with, where it's not just the academic community contributing, but you see some more like industrial actors getting involved?
Allen Institute of Brain Dynamics, right? It's kind of not academic. It's funded by some other funds, right? And they do amazing job, and they participate in open science initiatives, right? So there is some portions of come from industry. I've mentioned DICOM, right? That's industry standard, but we all benefit from it being developed. Right, so there is these interactions which happen, which come also from industry, right, and not necessarily, even though they might be closed in some portion, but they are still contributing to us. What other aspects, I wonder?
Like, I don't really know. I'm just like, I'm such an early player in this game. I don't really know about the money part very much, and my interactions very limited as like a Nylon developer, which we secured one maintenance grant last year from the Chen Zuckerberg Foundation, so we can implement some new features in Nylon to allow researchers to do what they have been requesting this whole time, but we didn't have time to, so we can hire someone full-time to do it. And yeah, that's about as much as I know.
I remembered another case. MathWorks is trying to catch up
Yes,
with the
MathWorks.
game. They're kind of trying. They have neuroscience represented, right? So they're looking at the portion of their clients. They go away, so they're actively participating or trying to participate in the community and support some developments which are also useful for MATLAB people.
Yeah, and I guess for the side of research, the biggest machine learning library, scikit-learn, it is like commonly used in the industry, and I would be surprised that there's no one from the industry like doing pull requests on them and to improve the code base.
Yeah, but that's a great example. Linux Foundation, right? So originally Linux wasn't funded, right? Now there is a foundation which provides this influx of funds to maintain Linux. The same for Git, right? So GitHub and other companies, they pay maintainers of Git, right? And that's where money from this award would go to, also to provide BIDS maintainers some money where they are needed, right, to maintain it. So there is like trickling of those funds, and hopefully more foundations would come to support, like scikit-learn is also supported with foundation behind it now, right? So I hope that those really important projects, they will get this foundational support behind them to sustain it through longer periods of time.
Thank you. I have a follow-up question on the last comment that was made about BIDS. So you mentioned that BIDS is being expanded to other areas, like you were giving, for instance, the example of genomics, which is great, like to unify the data across disciplines. So I was wondering though, like, given that these other fields, these other disciplines also have their own existing standards to organize the data, is there anything that's being done to ensure that this doesn't just become yet another standard that needs to be wrangled at some point?
To some degree, I call BIDS a meta standard. So what it at top level is how to name your files. But then those files, they're also need to come in standard form. Let's say I mentioned Neural Data Without Borders, which allows you another standard file format, how you stick your electrophysics data in there or microscopy data in there. And that's what happens with genetics as well, right? So they have primarily standards how you store your genetics data, let's say for a person, right? I'm not that versed in genetics field to tell if there is agreement how to name your files, right? Or maybe there are agreements, and the word, which is another word which we didn't mention, and I'll pay the price for it, semantic data, right? Or linked data. So we need to use and link to ontologies which exist, right? To dictionaries which exist, and probably there is such descriptors also for genetics data. So what BIDS could do, and we do support some genetic data kind of layout already in BIDS, to work with that community to enhance which metadata we extract from those files so it becomes kind of present at the higher level. So anybody who is generally knows BIDS, they would go, oh, there is genetic data. Oh, and that's about this, species, right? So this finding common terms which go across different modalities, that's what BIDS about. And then resorting to file formats which are specific to the modality in question. We don't force people who do electrophysiology to put it into nifty files, right? That would be a little bit disastrous.
I may be asking a somewhat similar question, but this, talking a lot about the benefits of standards, of course, but this sort of burden of standards and the research community having to sort of, massage their data to get into the standards to make them useful. And what do you see as some of the biggest challenges or what the biggest burdens, I guess, researchers face with? And what are some of the ways that you think those can be addressed to make it easier for people then to adopt these standards?
How it made it easy for you, Halchenko, to get?
Honestly, without BIDS, that entire project presented won't be possible, because that is a head-to-toe like project enabled by BIDS. We have data set that is already in BIDS format. There is BIDS app, and I think this is one very cool aspect of BIDS that's not being emphasized enough. It is a very simple standard. It tells you you need three inputs. You need the input directory, you need output directory, you need a label, it's either participant or group analyses. You only need these three things and exit code as 0 if you care about technical aspect. That's all the standard you have to write a piece of code and work with the BIDS data set. And from there, because FMI Prep also have some standardized output, that is why we can develop this whole denoising function in order to let it flow. So on a developer's perspective, I don't really see that is that much of a burden. We just need to make sure we have enough educational material to make sure this process is going to be smooth. Because if you are going to lay off all the burdens onto people who develop the tools, that is a very small pool of people. But now we have a lot of different kinds of tools to transform DICOM data into BIDS. And in every lab, there will be some kinds of a peer learning about how do you massage your data into this format. So it becomes a group effort. And this effort is being distributed, and knowledge is being distributed in this way. So we are no longer like holding power because we are the maker of the tools and we are maker of the standards. Yeah, so that's how I see it.
And if I may compliment, so pretty much answering the question how we reduce the burden for those who provide the data, right? So for the tools. Various ways. In neuroimaging, we were somewhat blessed because we had DICOM. We had also NIFTY already in the research, and we had DICOM in the that's what majority of scanners agreed to give us. So it was quite easy to establish this transformation, as long as DICOMs provide us all that metadata. So as long as the original files have the metadata, then it's all good. But that's why we talk to DICOM committee now to tell them, oh, you know, Philips, they don't provide us slice timing for the images still, right? So we need to talk to people to make sure that those other standards potentially have the metadata. Electrophysiology world, that one is a problem because there is like every manufacturer, like that's the typical example of there is 100 standards, they don't fit me, I do 101st one, right? So there is lots of them. That's why BIDS became a little bit relaxed to support EEG and MEG in terms of, oh, we support these multiple file formats which are most popular. So if modality has already file formats which are dominant to a degree, that's what BIDS would support, but that puts burden then for those unfortunate developers, right? Because they need to provide those libraries which provide you this kind of access to multiple formats. And that's what's happening in electrophysiology. There is spike extractor tools, or there is other ones which provide these interfaces. So it's kind of layered approach. But also going ahead, ideally, and that's what we're aiming, is the manufacturer put support for this open standard inside their hardware. So OpenFIS project, they are working to spit it out directly in MWB, right? Then it's all easy. We extract metadata, we rename the files, right, according to BIDS, and we're done. So that's the goal, to make it a new normal and work with the community for that.
All right, one last question up there.
Thank you. So I'm coming from the cell biology side of things, and I'm almost embarrassed to admit that in a room like this, because I've been saying for 10
Never
years.
be embarrassed to be a cell biologist.
I've been saying for 10 years that we're 10 years behind the neuroimaging crowd when it comes to everything we've talked about today, and I think that gap has probably grown. If we look at the prizes and then the makeup of the crowd here, it's usually coming from the more whole brain human imaging side of the equation. And so, as we've learned in the last couple talks, the resources are becoming available to share huge microscopy data sets, but it's still not been widely adopted. Now, so there must have been something that happened in neuroimaging apart from just the ease of developing standards. There was some cultural shift. There was something that changed, that pushed towards the direction of reproducibility, sharing, open data, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm wondering, like, if we want cell biology to catch up, what has to happen?
First of all, I want to congratulate you, because you are the one who can make yourself a name by jumping onto, bandwagon and just adopting, pretty much participating as a liaison between neuroimaging and cell biology, right? So we have support for microscopy. So start to introduce it as a, again, normal practice to share data in those standards, right? What is missing, report back. So don't be silent, just participate in it. How it happened in neuroimaging, we were somewhat blessed, I would say, again, with smaller set of standards we started to work with, and all the tools, if you look back, only what was Brain Voyager, which was like proprietary Mishiyoshi. The rest was all open. NIFTY standard came from NIH. Analyze files, which are based, I've forgotten on what, but all the tools were open, but not exactly fully open. Oh, SPM, which established really standardized way to do neuroimaging for a while, right? It was open source, but on MATLAB. So how do we then remove those additional restrictions and make it truly open? Oh, we start to develop INDPA. Scikit-learn was born, Learn, right? So all those started to emerge, but the whole ecosystem was ready, and we had lots of enthusiasts who were banging all over, like open, 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 right? So applying to different labels and showing the power, right? Showing the data set, oh, we could reanalyze it now 1,000 ways, right? That's how, Pierre was also in brain hack initiatives, right? Oh, let's make open gathering, to work together, right? So all those, they emerged and they picked up more momentum. So I would say just by doing it. If nobody does anything, then it will be hard to catch up, but it's actually really easy to catch up by just pretty much finding common points of reuse between different domains.
Well, I have a small personal story related to how things blow up. I remember during my PhD, it was really, really early on, and our lab is one of the few labs that collects a lot of resting state data in our institute. And one day, my boss, my PhD advisor, received an email from Chris Gogolewski saying, hey, we are developing this thing called BIDS. Do you want to make your data into BIDS, and then you can upload it onto Open Neuro, and then you can use Open Neuro we can send preprocessed data back to you. And we couldn't do that for two reasons. So firstly, the data is in the UK, and at that time, Open Neuro is in the States, and there is going to be some data transfer agreement that will not work out from our imaging center. And the second thing was, I was asked to look at this BID standard and ask, is this any useful for us? And I said no. Because at that time, it's the infrastructure hasn't really caught up yet, and in our imaging center, we doesn't support FMI-prep, and in order to support FMI-prep, you need some other technology like Singularity, and that time, is Singularity out at that point, like 2016? I don't know.
It was about to come out, I think.
Yeah. So it's things that are still very unstable. So it probably took about. It was literally last year when I met the now director of the imaging center at my PhD institute, come up and ask, so how are we going to make data into this BIDS thing? It's going to take time, and it really, I think in the beginning, it really takes that you really approach people to convince them, and you will get a lot of no's, and people will eventually change their minds, I think. Yeah.
Great, so join me in thanking the panelists today, especially thank you, Maru, for joining as well all the way. And I'm going to hand it back to Annabelle for closing remarks on this session.